My name's Sarah, and I'm 20 years old. Just had my birthday 3 days back. At home, it's me, my mom's stepdad, and my stepsister, who's 15. She's honestly the worst. Always trying to outdo me, acting all snobby and mean. We've never gotten along. My dad passed away when I was little, so I barely remember him. But I sure do remember all the arguing with my mom. Sometimes I think if my dad were still here, things might have been easier. Mom got married to my stepdad when I was 16, and he moved in with us. But she's been with him since I was 13. After dating for 3 years, they got married and moved in together. Even before they got married, my stepsister was a big problem. When my stepdad moved in, she got even worse. She annoyed me all the time and started more fights. I told my mom many times and even talked to her dad about it. But they said it's just normal fighting between siblings and didn't do anything about it. The truth is, they both loved my stepsister more. My stepdad always took her side because she's his real daughter, and even my mom treated her better than me. It hurt because she never did the same for me. As I grew up, I realized my mom and I are very different, and she didn't like that at all. When I was young, I liked boyish things like sports, games, and cars. But my mom wanted me to be more girly. She wanted me to wear dresses, do my hair, and learn makeup when I was just 7 years old. It's not that those things are bad, they just weren't my style. I felt like I couldn't be myself if I was always trying to please my mom. This caused a lot of arguments between us. She wanted me to be like her mini-me, but I wanted to be my own person. She never understood or respected that. My stepsister, on the other hand, was exactly what my mom wanted. It hurt because I was trying so hard to get my mom to like me for who I am. But then my stepsister came along and stole all her attention. My stepsister got all the love and attention from my mom, which made me really sad. It was hard enough that my mom took her side all the time, but my stepsister's attitude made it even worse. I couldn't stand being around her and couldn't wait to leave for college. So when I turned 18, I was super happy because I graduated from high school. Soon, I'd be off to college with a sports scholarship for playing lacrosse. I was ready to leave this place behind. I thought my mom would do something special for my 18th birthday since it would be the last one I celebrated at home with her. After this, I'd only come home for the holidays. I thought my mom would be excited for me, but I was wrong. Ever since my stepsister came into the picture, I've felt like I don't belong. I shouldn't have expected anything different. Not only did my mom not do anything special for my birthday, but she also sat me down later that day to talk about the future. She said my stepsister would start college soon, but she didn't have a sports scholarship like me, and her grades weren't good enough for an academic one. So my mom wanted me to help pay for her college, or else I wouldn't be welcome to stay here anymore. I was shocked. When I asked her to repeat herself, she said they decided to start saving up for my stepsister's college fund now to avoid problems later. Now that I was an adult, my mom and stepdad wanted me to help pay for my stepsister's college expenses. If I didn't, they said I couldn't live with them anymore. I was shocked by this demand because I couldn't afford to help. It felt crazy that they would cut me off for not helping my stepsister, who I didn't even get along with. My mom seemed serious about it, which made me really nervous. I didn't want to argue, so I said I needed time to think and went to my room. My mom works as a nurse, and my stepdad is a pediatrician. They both work at the same hospital, so they must make enough money to support my stepsister without needing my help. It felt unfair for them to ask me to contribute, especially since my stepsister and I didn't even have a good relationship. If we did, I might have considered helping out, but she's not a nice person, and I can't stand her. Why should I help pay for her college? It doesn't make any sense. Plus, I'm heading off to college myself soon. How can she expect me to send money when I'll need it for my own expenses? Even if I find a job there, it's not fair to ask me to chip in for my stepsister when I'll probably need that money for myself. I can't even refuse because of the threat of being kicked out. I want to come home for the holidays, and I'm not sure if I'll be allowed to do that if I don't help. It's scary to think I might end up homeless after college. After thinking it over, I realized there's just no way I can make this work. This situation wasn't fair to me at all. Instead of arguing with my mom, I decided to talk to my grandparents. I didn't want to keep negotiating with my mom only to be disappointed. Honestly, I didn't think it was worth arguing with her. She never understood my side and always favored my stepsister over me. My mom didn't want me to talk to my grandparents much. She said they were fragile and didn't need any trouble from me. I was only allowed to talk to them about safe things and could only visit them with her, never on my own. Once, I went to visit them without telling my mom, and when I told her later, she got really upset. I decided not to visit my grandparents alone again to avoid any drama. Even though they seemed fine to me, I didn't want to upset my mom. I'd always followed her rules about how to interact with them. But that day, I knew I had to break the rules and talk to them if I wanted their help convincing my mom. My grandparents were the only ones who could make my mom listen. I really needed them on my side this time to avoid being kicked out. I couldn't imagine working through college just to help my stepsister. So I planned to talk to my mom and secretly record her repeating the conditions she'd set for me. At first, I just wanted to tell my grandparents about the crazy demand my mom made and how she threatened to kick me out if I didn't help my stepsister. But as I spoke, all my feelings came rushing out and I ended up crying while explaining everything to them. I guess I wasn't handling my mom's rejection as well as I thought. I opened up about how badly I was treated at home, and they seemed shocked because whenever they saw me with my mom, I acted happy. But that was just a mask I had to wear because my mom didn't want my grandparents to worry. She said they were too old and sick. I never believed that because my grandparents were only in their early 60s and looked healthy to me. I think my mom didn't want me talking to my grandparents because she was scared I'd tell them how she treated me. She knew they'd be upset with her for favoring my stepsister over me. And that's exactly what happened when I told them everything. They comforted me and said they'd fix things. I wasn't sure what they meant, but my grandpa looked angry. After I calmed down, they gave me some money and told me to go out with my friends for my 18th birthday. They promised to make things right while I was out, which made me feel relieved. So I went out with my friends, and we had a great time celebrating my birthday late into the night. At around 9 o'clock, my grandparents texted me, asking me to come back to their place instead of going home. So I went there. It was surprising that I hadn't heard from my mother by then. Usually, if my grandparents talked to her about what I said, she'd be eager to confront me, so her silence felt strange. I got to my grandparents' house by 10 o'clock. After freshening up, they sat me down and said they'd talk to my mom. They assured me that everything was okay now. They explained that they asked my family to leave the house they were living in so they could transfer ownership to me. Turns out that house was a wedding gift from my grandparents to my parents, and they've been living there ever since. When my grandparents found out how my mom treated me, they realized they had to step in. They talked to her and asked her to take back what she said to me and treat me better. Instead of admitting she was wrong, she got defensive and told my grandpa to stay out of it. She thought now that I was an adult, I should start earning and giving back to the family, or I wouldn't have a place in her home anymore. That made my grandpa really mad because it wasn't fair. After a heated argument, he told her to leave the house since it was still legally his property. He never formally transferred ownership to her, so he had the power to evict her. She chose to leave rather than be a better mom to me. Not a surprise. My mom told my grandpa that her main focus was her own family now, not me, as if I wasn't part of her family or related to her by blood. She said she'd clear out of the house by the end of the week if that's what he wanted, then hung up. That's why I hadn't heard from her. My grandparents explained that it wasn't just what I told them that made them act, but also how my mom had been treating them for the past couple of years since she got married. She believed her husband and stepdaughter were her only family now and visited her parents only once or twice every 2 months. They stopped asking her to visit more often, but they did ask her to let me talk to them or visit them, and she always made excuses, claiming I was too busy, which wasn't true. She just didn't want me to see my grandparents because she was afraid I'd tell them the truth. She cleverly manipulated us into staying apart for her own selfish reasons. Now her manipulation and deceit had caught up with her, and she had to leave the house she'd lived in for almost 2 decades. I was upset that she chose my stepsister over me, but even more disgusted and angry that she thought her actions were justified. I was really disappointed and had given up hope that my mom would ever love me as much as my stepsister. I started to see her true colors. I actually felt relieved spending the night at my grandparents' place because I didn't want to see or hear from my mom. I hated being her daughter, and I hated her even more for what she did. The next morning, I went home with my grandpa to pack some clothes and essentials to stay with my grandparents until my mom and her family moved out. It was around noon, and nobody had left for work. Even my stepsister was home. They all looked upset, but I ignored them and went straight to my room to pack. My grandpa helped me. After about 10 minutes, my mom came into the room and insisted on talking to me in person. I didn't want to, but she kept pushing, so I agreed. She said she was bluffing on the phone with my grandpa and couldn't afford to move out so quickly. Now she needed me to talk to my grandpa to fix things. I was shocked that she would even make another request of me after everything that happened. So I flat out refused right to her face and told her she had no right to talk to me after what she did. She made her decision, and now she had to stick to it. Then she started to cry and said she didn't mean to hurt me. She claimed she was only trying to teach me responsibility when she asked for my help with my stepsister's college fund. She said if I had just talked to her instead of complaining to my grandparents, I would have known she didn't mean what she said. She only wanted to teach me to be responsible with money. She promised that all the money I sent for my stepsister's college fund would go into a separate account that she planned to give me later if I just talked to her once about my feelings. She said she never intended to kick me out, especially over something like this. But now, because of my actions, she might lose her home, and that hurt her deeply. She said I could do whatever I wanted, but asked me to remember that she loved me and always wanted what was best for me. I was speechless and didn't know what to do. It's been 2 days and I haven't talked to anyone about it. I'm not sure if my mom was telling the truth, but I feel guilty about it. I can't talk to my friends or family, so I'm turning to you for advice. I did tell my grandparents what my mom said, and my grandpa was skeptical. He thought my mom was just bluffing to manipulate me into letting them stay. I agreed with him. I became emotional because I didn't believe my mom had suddenly changed. The only way to know for sure was to test her. So I called her and told her I still wanted my grandpa to transfer the ownership of the house to me, just in case. At first, my mom seemed surprised and tried to reassure me, but when I insisted, she got defensive and accused me of not trusting her. I argued back, saying I couldn't suddenly trust her after years of mistreatment. She snapped at me, saying she didn't want a daughter like me. This just confirmed my suspicions that she was only being nice to avoid eviction and gain legal ownership of the house. Well, she showed her true colors, and I won't let her have the house. She can go to hell for all I care. If she doesn't want me as a daughter, fine. I don't want her as a mother either. Update 2, the legal process is done, and the house is officially mine. My mom has started moving out. Initially, she had a week, but we extended it to 2 weeks. Now she has about 4 days left. My grandparents plan to sell their current house and move in with me to take care of the house when I'm at college. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm excited to begin my new life. Update 3. So this might be my last update for a while now that things are falling into place. My mom moved out today, but not before she handed me the keys and warned me nastily that I might regret this decision. I don't understand her bitterness, considering she found an apartment near her school and work on short notice. It's smaller, but she should be grateful, like I am for my amazing grandparents and supportive friends. I'm also grateful for everyone here. Despite being strangers, you've all been kind to me and I appreciate it. I'm typing this in my old room, in my old house, but now with a family who loves me. In a few months, I'll be off to college. I'm finally living the life I've always wanted, and I couldn't be happier. Stay tuned for more stories about my journey. My name is Melissa. I'm 26 years old and getting ready to have my baby at home. But there's a problem. My mother-in-law doesn't seem to like me much. She says mean things about me to my husband when she thinks I can't hear. She says I'm not nice, not helpful, don't make money, and have no good qualities. I wanted to tell her off, but I'm pregnant and don't want to make things worse. So I just try to ignore her negativity and focus on taking care of myself and the baby. I'm really excited to meet my baby soon. So while I'm waiting, I take walks and talk to my belly every day. It's a happy time for me. But then my mother-in-law shows up unexpectedly and stays for too long. She complains about everything, like the food and the baby's room. Finally, my baby is born safely, and even though things are busy, I enjoy raising her in my cheerful childhood home. I tell my husband that I'll be back at his place next weekend, but secretly, I wish I could stay home a little longer. I wonder how long I can rely on others, especially since my husband isn't interested in doing housework. I thought to myself. Holding my sleeping baby Lisa in my arms, I smiled at her. This is going to be your home, Lisa. We need to go back and make it cozy, I whispered. When I arrived at our house with lots of bags, I hoped someone would open the door for me when I rang the bell, but nobody did. I struggled to unlock the door and went inside, only to find nobody there. I had told my husband I'd be back by now. As I walked into the living room, I was shocked by what I saw. What? What happened here? The room was a complete mess, with stuff scattered everywhere. It wasn't just untidy. It looked like someone had deliberately made a mess. Was it a break-in? Terrified, I ran out of the house. Hello, police. I just got back from having my baby, and my house is a disaster, I said shakily into the phone, while my peacefully sleeping baby began to cry, adding to my panic. A neighbor passing by noticed our distress and kindly invited us to rest at their house. They helped me calm down from the shock and fear. After giving my daughter some milk, she fell back asleep. Soon, we heard police sirens, and I went back to my house with the neighbor by my side. The front door was still locked. I was too scared to go in after seeing the living room, so I hadn't checked the other rooms. When I explained this to the police, they commended me for being cautious. They explained that encountering a burglar can be dangerous, so it's safer to stay outside and wait for them to arrive. I hadn't thought about that in my rush, but the idea scared me now. As I finished explaining, a voice full of uncertainty spoke up. What's going on? Why are the police here? It was my mother-in-law. It's a bad situation, mother-in-law. Our house has been ransacked, and we suspect it was a burglary. The police are here to investigate, I explained before she could interrupt. I felt a sharp sting on my cheek as my mother-in-law slapped me hard. My vision blurred from the shock, and amidst the chaos of neighbors and police, I instinctively held my sore cheek. My mother-in-law's face was flushed red with anger as she yelled at me, accusing me of being shameless for calling the police about a burglary. I was stunned, unable to understand why she was so furious, especially with the pain in my cheek throbbing. A neighbor tried to intervene, explaining that calling the police was the right thing to do and it's their job to investigate, but she wouldn't listen. She went on to scold me for leaving my husband alone and going back to my parents' house during childbirth. She said I was useless if I wasn't at home doing housework. And now, she was upset that I had caused a scene by calling the police. Even though everyone around tried to reason with her and tell her it wasn't my fault, she wouldn't listen. As I tried to make sense of it all, I realized something strange. Despite our house possibly being burgled, she didn't seem concerned about any losses. And even though it was the first time she was meeting her grandchild, she didn't show any interest. Why? Everyone around me didn't seem to agree with what I was saying. That's not the point. How can you accuse me without even saying sorry? My mother-in-law completely ignored my question, sticking to her argument. Mom, what's happening? Brian, my husband, interrupted the argument, appearing quite calm. Brian, listen to this. It's awful. My mother-in-law's face lit up with delight at the sight of her beloved son. Melissa apparently called the police. Huh. Why? She's been going on about a burglary, but that's impossible. Brian, please tell her to stop being so ridiculous. My mother-in-law insisted. Is that true? Melissa, maybe you got it wrong about the burglary. It's bothering the neighbors, you know? And the police have other things to deal with, so let's send them away soon. Brian said, trying to calm things down. What? I was shocked, but for a different reason this time. Not only was my mother-in-law against me, but now my husband, Brian, seemed to be too. I couldn't believe he would say something like that. Wait, Brian, our house isn't just messy. The police are still investigating. We don't know for sure if it was a burglary yet, but something is definitely off about the state of the house. We're about to check if anything's missing and file a report. No, absolutely not. Brian interrupted me with a raised voice. But why? The conversation was becoming more confusing by the moment. I felt lost, and tears began to fill my eyes. I came back here, and nobody was here, and the room was a mess. I didn't know what happened, and I was scared. Unable to hold back my sobs, I found comfort in the embrace of a neighbor, their warmth making me cry even more. Yet in front of me, both my mother-in-law and husband seemed irritated and simply stared at me. Why? Why won't you understand? My heartache seemed to affect my daughter too, as she woke up crying. This only seemed to annoy my mother-in-law and husband even further. With the kindness of the neighbors and the concerned look of the police, I ended up spending the night at a neighbor's house. Stolen things? I don't know. Melissa's just overreacting. Let's go inside, my mother-in-law said, while my husband added, yeah, Melissa, calm down. They didn't seem to care about the mess and quickly went inside after the police finished their investigation. I didn't think he was like that, I thought, standing in front of the closed door, recalling my husband's words. My mom still treats me like a child, and it's annoying. I usually just go along with her to avoid conflict, but it's really a hassle. Despite his complaints, though, I couldn't stay outside forever. After apologizing repeatedly, I ended up spending the night at my neighbor's house. Mom needs to be strong. I'll do my best, I whispered to my daughter, who was finally falling asleep despite being fussy. The next day, when I returned home, my mother-in-law and husband were there. Did you really stay here last night with everything in such a mess? The living room was somewhat tidied up for them to sit, but it looked no different from the day before. I had checked the other rooms with the police, and it seemed like things had been thrown out of storage in all of them. The mess was everywhere. Despite always complaining about my cleaning, my mother-in-law had stayed in the house in that condition, and she hadn't lifted a finger to clean up. She just sat there, looking unhappy. What do you mean? Did you really? I felt sorry for Brian, who was abandoned by his wife, so I couldn't go home. Her words hit me, and I responded, it's not that I left. It's that you didn't listen to what I was saying. What? How dare you speak like that? My mother-in-law's face quickly turned angry. Brian jumped in and stopped making a big deal out of the burglary. Have you calmed down now? He said it in a way that irritated me, and something inside me snapped. You're right. It's not like we were burgled, huh? I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. But Brian didn't react to my anger. He just smirked a little. Finally realized it, huh? Yeah, you were overreacting about the burglary. Anyway, start cleaning up, Brian said as if it was someone else's problem. And my mother-in-law looked smug. Cleaning and taking care of the house are a wife's duties, aren't they? My mother-in-law said this in a sickeningly sweet tone, as if talking to a pet. What? I'm not cleaning up. It's your mess, so you should clean it, I said, feeling belittled by them. What? How dare you? As expected, they didn't like my response. You're such a terrible wife. Get to work. My mother-in-law snapped at me, clearly annoyed. What a hassle, my husband grumbled in agreement. I handed them the divorce papers I had prepared and filled out first thing in the morning. I want a divorce, I said firmly. My husband blinked, looking surprised. That's right. I want a divorce right now, I declared firmly. In that instant, my mother-in-law grabbed the divorce papers and melodramatically lamented, oh, poor Brian, being treated like this is so awful, as she hugged my husband's head. Such a big baby, aren't you? Ida tried to bite my tongue,
but my true feelings slipped out. "What did you just say, Melissa?" The two of them were so furious they seemed ready to explode. But I wasn't going to back down. "Did you not hear me? Or are you pretending not to understand, Brian? Divorce. Sign the papers now." I knew it was petty. I knew I shouldn't stoop to their level, but I didn't care at that point. "Stop joking around and apologize." Enraged, they pushed me to the ground, pinning me down. "Apologize now." Brian's strength made it difficult to breathe, and tears filled my eyes. "Melissa, let go of my daughter right now." My saviors were my parents rushing to my rescue. Behind them, I saw the friendly officer from the previous day, coughing and struggling for air. Relief washed over me, and my strength waned. "Why are you barging in here like this?" "Leave immediately." My mother-in-law and husband were being held back by the officer, squirming and resisting. "It's useless. You've been caught assaulting someone." With my father's help, I stood up and smiled at the two struggling figures. "Actually, I just asked the officer to come and check on the situation from yesterday. I never expected you to attack me." "What? What's happening?" My husband growled, but I wasn't afraid anymore. "We have a baby monitor camera installed in this house for our little Lisa. It's a live stream camera. It couldn't record the person who trashed the room, but," as I spoke, both of them visibly relaxed. "Huh. So what if it's a live camera? I told you, right? Now, the kind neighbor who helped us yesterday is watching over this room. They listened to your conversation yesterday, along with a lot of people at the police station. My parents were watching too." Yes, after my mother-in-law and husband disappeared behind the door yesterday, I started checking the baby monitor camera. The police suspected that this whole break-in thing seemed fishy, perhaps even staged. Not just my mother-in-law, but my husband too might be involved, I explained. They guessed right. When I came home, the room was all messy, and you both acted surprised, blaming me for it. You planned to make my parents apologize by saying they didn't want a daughter-in-law who'd do something like that. But you didn't want a daughter-in-law at all because we had a baby girl, not a boy. You wanted to replace me with someone else, right? And what's this about an affair approved by the mother-in-law? I said it all quickly, and everyone looked at them coldly. "It must be a mistake," my husband said nervously. "No way. I would never cheat." Melissa, do you still have more to say? This nonsense. Stop." My mother-in-law, who forgot herself for a moment and got angry, wasn't forgiven by the others. I also refused to accept being judged on such an unfair basis. I don't want a family that doesn't care about how our baby is doing. It's not right that our neighbor, who's been looking after her, shows more love than my own family since I arrived today. I'm going back to my parents' house. And yes, I'll file for divorce and fight for custody of our daughter. It seems that's what you all wanted. No, wait a minute, not to the police station. I don't want to go. Let go. I don't want to. Both of them caused a scene as the police took them away. Afterward, my mother-in-law and husband became infamous in the neighborhood, and not in a good way. They tried to make things right by offering me a divorce settlement, but it didn't help. The rumors had already spread. No matter how much they insisted they paid me, no one believed them. I returned to my parents' house and am raising my daughter with their help. Through a friend's recommendation, I found a job nearby. It's not easy, and I have my worries, but when I see my daughter's smiling face, I feel determined to do my best. I'll work hard to raise Lisa well, making sure she doesn't turn out like her father.
My name is Catherine. I'm 34 years old, and I've been staying with my mom at our family house ever since my dad died 3 years ago. I decided to stay because I didn't want to leave my mom alone. So I've been here for 3 years now. During this time, some really bad people came to see us. These people were my own brother, Bob, and his wife, Jane. I've known Bob since he was born, and Jane has been his girlfriend since they were in middle school. Bob used to bring Jane home during vacations, so I got to know her too. To be honest, I can't forget about those two. They used to bully me just for fun. Both of my parents were usually busy with work, so they weren't around much on weekends. But when they were gone, that's when the bad stuff happened. We lived in a big mansion that my dad, who was a CEO, built for us. But one time, they told me to play hide and seek in the mansion, and when I hid in a closet, my brother and Jane filled it with stuff, trapping me inside. I'd be stuck in there until just before my parents came home, and then my mom would scold me for messing up the closet. One day, my mom came home early from work and caught Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was really mad. After that, they never locked me in the closet again, but they kept bothering me. I was angry at my parents for not being there when I needed them. I resented Bob and Jane, but I also felt mad at my parents for not helping me. Then, when I was in middle school, Bob and Jane did something really mean. They cut up my school uniform with scissors, wrote all over my textbooks, and even ruined my cushions and bedding. I found out later that Bob and Jane were in high school at the time and they were angry because they got bad grades on their exams and their parents scolded them. That's probably why they took such a mean revenge on me. I was shocked in my messed up room. Why was this happening to me? Why wouldn't anyone help me? I stood there lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to dinner, my mom came to check on me and saw my room. She screamed, and my dad came running too. My brother came in last, struggling to hold back his laughter. He couldn't help but chuckle sometimes. Surprised, my parents looked at me as I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." Tears started flowing as soon as I spoke. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. They've ruined my toys, my school stuff, and my clothes. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm mad at both of you, Dad and Mom. You haven't helped me. It was probably the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Before that, I just quietly endured and cried alone when things were tough. But this time, I cried loudly like a child. Seeing me like that, my mom hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything." Even my brother, after seeing how upset I was, seemed to understand how serious it was. He tried to leave, but my dad stopped him. "Do you understand what you've done? This is serious," my father said. Even though he wasn't yelling, his voice was scary, even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Come on, Dad. It's not like we committed a crime. We were just having some fun," my brother replied. "Destruction of property is a crime. You need to understand that you have to make up for it," my father explained. But Catherine is family, and I'm still young. Minors can't be criminals, can they?" my brother protested. My father sighed deeply at my brother's excuse. "True, as a minor, you might not have the means to pay. But as parents, we're responsible for your actions. If you can't compensate, we'll have to. It's time for you to go live with your uncle." Uncle? My father's younger brother was known for being strict and disliked dishonesty. He was like a scary figure to the neighborhood kids, similar to a boogeyman. While he was nice to well-behaved children like me, he had no patience for troublemakers like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along with him. "No, I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I'll behave better," my brother begged. "I've heard that promise too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet, when you two chased her around, when you threw bugs at her even though you knew she was scared, every time we found out, we scolded you and you always promised to stop. But you kept doing it anyway. We can't have someone in our home who hurts our family, even if they're family themselves. You're not welcome here anymore," my father declared. After my father's declaration, he grabbed Bob by the neck and took him away. Later on, I learned that my parents were really upset with Bob's behavior. Even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to get why he was in trouble. He just kept bothering me. I figured he was beyond help. Some people just don't understand how to behave in society. I learned that from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to university using our father's money after high school. But our father didn't think he'd do well there. He said, "You'll just cause trouble for others." So Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after high school, but he seemed desperate to leave. As soon as he graduated, he and Jane rented an apartment together. They decided to live together without any help from our parents or uncle for rent or expenses. Later on, Bob asked me to lend him some money, even though I was just starting high school and didn't have a job. All the money I had saved up before, which Bob used to steal when he lived with us, was given back to me by my parents. I kept track of it in a notebook. So, I did have money saved, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I told Bob. Aren't you embarrassed to ask your high school sister for money? I don't even have a job, so I don't have extra money to give you. After that, I told my parents about Bob's request, and they were angry. They'd promised not to help him anymore. I thought Bob and Jane should learn to live on their own without relying on others. From then on, I focused on my studies. I worked hard and went to college. After graduating, I got a job and continued learning new things. I was so busy with my own life that I forgot all about Bob. As I had forgotten about him, an invitation to Bob's wedding arrived at our house. The bride was Jane, of course, his partner. So they're finally tying the knot. I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should go to the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He had always been frail, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so my mother and I panicked and called for help. During this crisis, I reached out to my brother, but he brushed me off, saying, "I'm getting married soon. Don't bother me during this important time." Even when I told him our father was urgently hospitalized, he dismissed it, saying, "He just tripped, right? Make sure you come to my wedding." Then he hung up. Sadly, our father passed away shortly after. With the funeral arrangements underway, my mother and I informed my brother that we couldn't attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we should be there, my mother and I decided not to go. We also let Jane's parents know about our father's passing and our inability to attend. While Jane's parents understood, my brother and Jane accused us of disrespect for not attending. The message my mother and I received on our voicemail accusing us of rudeness was so absurd that it made me wonder who the real rude person was. While we were focused on arranging our father's funeral, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without considering our loss. After that, my mother and I never brought it up, but we felt like our relationship with my brother was completely broken. Then, out of nowhere, my brother showed up at our door. When I answered the intercom and he said he had a delivery, I wasn't expecting him to be there in person. When I opened the door, there he was, along with Jane, carrying large suitcases. They'd pushed past me and barged into the house. "Hey, hold on, what's going on?" I protested. It seemed like my brother had forgotten our father's words, who had told him never to come back to our house. Despite that, they both barged in, dropped their luggage in the hallway, and started talking nonsense to me. "You and Mom need to leave this house right now," my brother demanded. "What? Mom has dementia, remember?" I was stunned. What was my brother talking about? It had been 3 years since our father passed away, and he hadn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything to make amends. And now, he was asking for our family mansion. On top of that, he was assuming our mother had dementia and planning to kick her out. I was left speechless. Then our mother appeared from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's happening?" As she saw my brother, she said something shocking. "Oh, who are you?" "If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. My brother and Jane laughed at her. "See, this happens every time we see her. Her dementia must be getting worse. You take care of Mom. I'll take the mansion." "I'm the oldest son, so I should get it," my brother declared as he walked further into the house. Jane, copying my brother, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and go. I never want to see you again." I hurried to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you all right?" We felt like we were being pushed out, so we left the mansion, leaving all the old furniture behind. My mother and I gathered our things and left the house. Luckily, a friend of mine who heard about our situation offered us his house. He was overseas and couldn't take care of it himself. Originally, his cousin looked after the house, but since he's moving to another state next year, it seemed like a good opportunity for us. When we arrived at the house and unpacked, my mother and I finally felt relieved. Then my mother chuckled and said, "We left that house, but I still don't like how Bob and Jane behave. Maybe we should sell the house," she suggested. I asked my mother about what Bob said regarding her having dementia. She explained, "That's just a story they made up. About 2 years ago, they started asking me for money all the time, but they didn't even attend their father's funeral. And they never bothered to check on me afterward." I couldn't believe their audacity to ask for money after all they'd done, so every time they asked, I pretended not to know them and said, "Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right?" "Oh, I understand now," I remarked. It seemed Bob and Jane misinterpreted my mother's deliberate distance and treated her like a stranger because she wanted nothing to do with them anymore. They thought her indifference meant she genuinely didn't remember them, leading them to believe she had dementia. Regardless, I believe it was wrong to kick someone out of their home, especially if they thought they had dementia. My mother quickly decided to sell the mansion. We had been discussing selling it ever since my father passed away, as it was too big for just the two of us. At that time, an executive from my father's company, where I was being trained as a successor, expressed interest in buying it. So the buyer was almost certain. We just needed to go through the paperwork. When I spoke to a real estate contact and explained the situation to the executive, they agreed that leaving the mansion with Bob and Jane would lead to serious problems. It was clear that action needed to be taken swiftly. A week later, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Bob called my mother while Jane called me repeatedly. They probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes and just enjoy our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us realizing it, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered Jane's call, she exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer sooner? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over." "Wait, didn't you two take over the house?" "I think it says who should be saying that we've been taken over," I retorted. "No, Bob and I were living in this mansion, but now some strangers have shown up and are demanding that we leave. They just barged in and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over," she exclaimed. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to remind her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about being taken over, but you're not even the legal owners. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to someone else. So strangers who have no connection to the property should quickly move out." "What? She sold it? This mansion?" She sounded shocked. "But this mansion belongs to Bob," she protested. "When did anyone ever say that?" I questioned. "Well, no one explicitly said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't it natural for him to eventually inherit this house, the property, and his dad's company? And I'll be living as the elegant wife of the CEO in this mansion," Jane argued. Despite her confidence, Jane seemed panicked. I couldn't help but burst out laughing again. The fact that she assumed Bob would automatically inherit the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father ran was astonishing. Such naive thinking. I thought to myself. Given Jane's strong belief, Bob probably also thought he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Once more, I couldn't help but laugh at Jane's words. "Bob is the boss, and you're his wife? How can you even think that's possible? You both started at the company without any special training or education to run it," I chuckled. Jane seemed surprised by my teasing. She shot back, "Well, I might inherit the company from my uncle then." I laughed even harder. "You should check the company news first. And about my uncle's business, his cousin's son is already running it." "What? So Bob can't be CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife?" Jane couldn't believe it. "That's right. Can I hang up now?" "I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore," I said. "Please, Catherine, wait. Can you give us some money?" Jane pleaded. I hung up the call, but later I heard what happened next from Uncle. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion. They clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It turns out, since they were hired by Uncle's company, they were undergoing strict training, and they were so scared that they cried when Uncle took them away. They were taken to a mountain retreat owned by one of Uncle's friends because they were too unpredictable on their own. Uncle warned them that if they didn't behave at the retreat, they'd be stuck there forever. Despite this, they tried to escape multiple times but got caught every time. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to manage the house was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm living in his parents' house now. He's planning to come back home this year, so we'll start planning our wedding soon. My mother and uncle who helped us will be invited to the wedding, but Bob and Jane won't be invited.